Sabrina Holiday Spectacular Issue 2. Sabrina wants to see if her Thanksgiving dinner list is complete, and is happy about the stereotypical witch things she'll be having for it. Della teleports behind her and jumps at any excuse to complain at her, making me glad she's not really in the 90s comic. She complains that witches don't celebrate holidays, they destroy them for others. There's no believability in them not having any holidays of their own. People invented holidays for a reason, to give themselves an excuse to celebrate and take a day off. Even the 70s comic had Hilda list off witch holidays about hexing. Sabrina calls her a kidder for no logical reason, and Della says she doesn't appreciate not being taken seriously. But while she creates fire, she still warps away. So Sabrina's right when she says that her bark is worse than her bite. Because she would have taken away her powers or turned her into a cat if she was remotely effective as a villain. But still, I assume that Sabrina is being portrayed as an idiot here. But it's not self-aware of how incompetent Della actually is. Della casts a spell and says that all of Sabrina's friends and relatives will be sent back in time to different holidays. And she'll change things back once Sabrina's learned that nobody messes with her. But why would she do this specific spell? This is supposed to justify the premise? There's so many spells she would have thought of doing before this. But she does this just because Sabrina wanted to celebrate Thanksgiving. This is the kind of writing that feels contrived, even though it technically makes sense. It's too convoluted of a thing for her to do. What really makes no sense is that Zelda wasn't affected by the spell. She just comes home and asks where everyone is. As I'm detached from the story because it feels so arbitrary. Della makes no sense as a person. Sabrina says that nobody's shown up ever since she had an argument with Della. So Zelda figures out what happened, because this happened to her 200 years ago. Her loved ones were all sent back to the original holidays, and they were given amnesia. The reason she hasn't been sent back in time is that she was vacationing on Neptune, so she was out of her magical jurisdiction. That doesn't make any sense. She could cast the spell on her regardless by just imagining her if she could cast spells on people that weren't in front of her. And I have to assume that Zelda means the other realm Neptune, which had to have been terraformed with magic to be inhabitable. Otherwise, that's nonsense. So how did Zelda find her loved ones back in time without any of them still in the present to tell her what happened, so that she could solve the problem? She just somehow figured out what happened on her own, or Della told her. After Della undid the spell herself when she learned nobody messes with her. But Della didn't tell them what happened this time, so good thing Zelda's here. You'd think that Sabrina would run into Zelda's old loved ones when she goes back to the original holidays, because she'd be going back to the same time period where they were sent. Zelda's concerned about Della altering history. The head witch is totally unconcerned with doing that, which makes sense in a cynical sort of way. I thought Ida and Clearda would just be a Halloween thing, considering how they look. Why do they have to appear again? Sabrina sees Ida at the first Thanksgiving dinner, and she's surrounded by normal-looking humans who somehow aren't freaking out at her appearance. So I'm forced to assume that this is the other realm, because there's no reason Della would make them cool with her. She tries to make cranberry sauce, but someone spits it out and immediately assumes that she mixed in poisonous berries with the cranberries. They somehow don't believe her when she says that she doesn't know which berry is what, probably because she also said that she doesn't know her own name. So he immediately decides to start a food fight like he's a little kid. That seems unrealistic. Sabrina taking this silly story seriously is probably supposed to be part of the charm, like in the earlier comics. She sure took a long time to zap herself into pilgrim attire. She's lucky she wasn't seen before this. She offers them oven-top stuffing as a peace offering, and they don't know how to eat it. She should have known better. She would have known that they don't have ovens yet. Then she corrects her mistake, and instantly people accept it as a peace offering and calm down. I wish it was explained that that was a part of her spell. And Ida calls her a white-haired girl when she's clearly a blonde. I guess she's colorblind. Ida's told that if she comes with her, the spell will be broken. So she remembers who she is, and Sabrina says that Christmas and New Year need their help. Wouldn't Della realize that this whole journey is just going to make her value holidays even more? Why was Sabrina in the habit of celebrating mortal holidays if, according to the previous issue, she spent her whole life living in the witch world? There have to be tons of witches who got into the habit of continuing to celebrate these holidays, and then their families moved back to the witch world. So that's why. Either that or her family decided to move to the witch world, even though she'd be protesting because she wouldn't want to be separated from Harvey. They warped to the North Pole, and Ida somehow thinks it's glorious, and none of them care that it's freezing cold, because the writing has no quality control or care put into it at all. Even the 70s comic always had the characters complain that the North Pole is cold. It could easily be explained that they have a heat spell cast on them. Sabrina can spot Clara even though she's invisible, because she can recognize her hair bow anywhere. And somehow Ida didn't. But it's not Clara. It's a polar bear wearing her bow. It's at least explained that her bow blew off in the polar winds. I guess Ida is speaking telepathically, since she has no mouth. That's another thing you're supposed to just assume without being told. Sabrina says that they're 100 years back, the year of Santa's first worldwide toy delivery. Yeah, just conveniently ignore the fact that Christmas is based on the pagan holiday of Saturnalia, and that's why it was banned at one point. No, Christmas is just defined as a consumerist holiday. It never existed as we knew it until this point. I mean, I'm pretty sure Christmas and the whole Santa delivering toys thing was a thing longer than just 100 years back. If this is accurate, then they should state the exact year that it started being a thing in pop culture, and go back to that specific year. Instead, they just arbitrarily chose 100 years back for some reason. I guess that's just how it is in the other realm. Some elves assume that Clara's looking for Frosty's place, and it's over by the next ice cap. She says she's icing over, and is thankful for her invisible thermal undies. So that alone keeps her from instantly freezing to death. That must have a spell cast on her so that a heat bubble keeps her from dying to extreme cold. In the rare case that she'd go there. The same spell the elves must have on them. There's too much this story is too lazy to explain. It would be so confusing to read this casually. The elves aren't startled by an invisible girl because they're supernatural beings too. Even though there's no way they would have seen a girl like her before. And there's no indication they have a social life with other realm beings aside from elves. Then some cows show up, and Santa says they won't work for him because every time they see something green, they want to stop and graze. At least this is interesting. Horses got too cold to deal with it. That just makes me wonder why that doesn't apply to every animal he tried to fly with. He would have cast a spell on his animals to make them immune to the cold as a necessary part of the job. He would have used the same magical artifact that's making him and his elves immune to the cold. The ostriches were too dumb, and the camels were too stubborn. I guess he can't use a spell to get rid of those problems. And the elves have been cleaning up after the elephants for weeks. Again, I guess they don't have a magical way to get rid of that problem. Santa tells the reindeer to stay out of his greenhouse, and arbitrarily plans on calling this thing off for another year, when he tried every animal, including ostriches. So there's no reason he wouldn't give reindeer a chance. Why did he try so many animals that weren't immediately available to him? Why did he try all those animals before reindeer? Somehow, Clara has to fly with the baby reindeer in front of Santa's window to give him the idea to use reindeer. So she altered history. She was part of a stable time loop all along. Sabrina tells her she did good work. Santa's mad that there's no more magic dust. It's surprising to see him mad so much. But at least that holds my attention. It's more realistic characterization than he usually gets. It's amusing that an elf says, "It did take a lot to fly that team of whales we tried out last week." So them needing too much flying dust is why they aren't used. I'm just forced to assume Santa and his elves are aliens from the other realm. Because if they were witches, Della would be forbidding them from doing what they do, and they'd be able to effortlessly solve these problems. Sabrina tells Santa to feed the reindeer corn, being part of a stable time loop once again, where if she tried to prevent history from being altered by Dilla, that would alter history. Sabrina says she put a spell on the corn plants that the reindeer got given, so that if they eat the corn, they'll fly. I like that, and I really like the extra touch that he has a greenhouse. No wonder he can get his food at the North Pole. They get given little dolls made in their image. grammar mistake saying that this is all Della's doings. Then time stops, and Father Time's knocking on a door telling an old hag to let him in. Okay, this is the most interesting part of the story, because I never saw this tale before. He stepped out to get the paper, and some old lady got into the house. Sabrina immediately jumps to the conclusion that it's Hilda, and just as I was thinking that the reason she went in was because she loves to inconvenience, because that's her character, we see her playing patty cake with a baby. That's baby New Year, and time can't start again until he comes out. So he's clearly a supernatural being, a god of some kind. And yet Father Time, who you'd think would also be a god, is surprised and confused that Sabrina used her witchcraft to go through the door. I guess he was so sheltered that he never learned about witches. Not all the races of supernatural beings interact. Hilda creates conflict to pad out the story. She thought she was just a babysitter, and when Sabrina tells her that they need to take the baby out, Hilda uses magic to tie her up. Hilda says she's here to babysit forever, I guess because she's enjoying it, and doesn't remember any other purpose in her life. So she thinks she'd feel lost otherwise. And she's antisocial, so she wouldn't want a stranger around. It felt convenient that everybody else immediately trusted Sabrina and went with her, so it's kinda realistic that Hilda doesn't believe her. Lucky for Sabrina, Hilda teleports her out of the house, so Clara can untie her just fine, and Father Time says they need a Trojan horse to distract her. So Hilda gets distracted by witch food, and Sabrina and her friends sneak in from the giant bucket of food. That's more creative than using an actual Trojan horse Greek style. So Sabrina uses magic to tie Hilda up. Somehow the baby really is needed to start time again, and Sabrina teleports home. Della gets mad at Sabrina for reversing her spells. What did she expect? Sabrina gives her a teddy bear saying happy holidays after everything Della put her through, just to represent that she's an all-loving hero. And once again, the writing makes no sense. Della cries and says that she always wanted a teddy bear, but was worried that it would affect her image. So this just happens as a get-out-of-jail-free card for her to say that the holidays aren't all bad way too easily, when she was already enough of a ridiculous nonsense character to be opposed to all of them just because she's a witch in the first place. So I haven't been put in a good enough mood with her to be nothing but grateful that she's got a redeeming moment. Thank goodness that story's over. After that is a better colored reprint of Yule from issue 65. So that's where I got the footage from. And a reprint of 2 familiar Christmas-themed off panels from the 70s comic. So that's where I got those panels. So I had to redo those videos too. In the next story, Harvey refuses to go with Sabrina in a ladies' lingerie store because he gets too embarrassed with those things around. Sabrina says that she only has to get a few more gifts, so he can wait outside if he wants. Naturally, he says that it's cold out here, but he blushes too easily. It starts snowing, and he says that she's been in there for an hour. He says he's gonna look like a snowman. And then Sabrina sees a snow sculpture and thinks Harvey turned into it, and screams that he lost his head. She only thought that so easily because she's a witch, so she's used to unscientific things happening. For all she knew, he turned into a snowman because she was worried about that happening. And her mind made it real. When it started snowing right after Harvey was worried that it would, I wondered if something else would happen because he'd say it did. He pulled a prank on Sabrina, laughing at her and asking what she thinks of his great snow sculpture work. This is shocking, but sadly, he's had a few mean moments before, so this is actually in character. Sabrina turns him into a statue with a pedestal saying General Nuisance on it. After she rouses suspicion because someone says that he never heard of General Nuisance before, she feels guilty and turns him back to normal. And he somehow has the feeling that something happened, but doesn't know what. And he's being followed by Christmas turtle doves that he somehow thinks are pigeons when they aren't white-colored. Because that's part of the spell, I guess. And then there's a reprint of the garage sale off panel. And a reprint of the story where Sabrina messes things up for a cop by giving him a sweater. So that's where I got the better looking panels from. The first story felt contrived, so I couldn't take it seriously and wanted to end the whole time. While Della is capable of doing this, Of all the spells that she could have thought to use to arbitrarily punish Sabrina for celebrating holidays, why did she send her loved ones back in time to the first instance of a bunch of holidays? She wouldn't have done that. She just turned her into a frog. That's a lot of effort. And yet somehow she had done the same thing to Zelda, and that's how she knew to tell Sabrina how to undo this. Then how did Zelda undo this? Did Zelda tell her what she did? But she was mad at Sabrina for saving her friends. Also, what was stopping Sabrina from simply teleporting all of her loved ones back to her? I guess it makes sense that she can't do that because her friends were sent back in time. Her magic could scan all of reality, but it can only scan one time period. All she could do if she tried to do it is zap up duplicates of them. You'd think Ida would have scared the pilgrims with her appearance, and Sabrina would have frozen in the North Pole. But there's no attempt at making sense in this story. And the second story is about Harvey stubbornly standing outside for an hour, and he gets revenge on Sabrina for making him deal with the cold for an hour by putting a snowman in his place and making her think it was him. Wait, did he have gloves on? I don't think it's realistic that he would have put up with making a snowman when it'd be freezing cold to his bare hands. It was a cruel prank, but I understand why he did it. I'd never want to stay out in the cold for an hour. But it was his own stupidity. He could have walked inside and stayed right next to the entrance the whole time, and just kept his eyes closed the entire time he was there. I thought Harvey was being too whiny right from the start. At least Sabrina quickly feels guilty about abusing her magic on him and reverses it after she got mad at him, reminding us of how good she's supposed to be.